Welcome back to the Grim and Glamorous podcast, a podcast about pop culture and the paranormal. We are your hosts, LBG and Drea. All right, so welcome back. Coming back to a topic that we sort of did before about cancel culture, YouTubers, and all that. It's something that I know that we're both kind of interested in.
I don't know if I'm excited about it because, people that we watch, on YouTube, Shane Dawson. I don't know how much of a fan you are of Jenna Marbles. I know that you said that, you'd like to watch Julian stuff, the Jenna Julian podcast. I don't know if, that was a thing for you. I like to watch every once in a while Jenna Marbles' stuff. I got into Shane Dawson pretty late. I want to say maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I mean, this was early stuff where he would post stuff every day, but it would be I'm going to test all Taco Bell food, or I'm going to make an Oreo cake and eat the whole thing. There was a specific video, and I think it was, I don't remember what the name of the video was, but it was he sold a pair of his used underwear on eBay.
I feel like he's gone through phases and a progression of the type of content that he does, and I remember that was a specific time period where he would do funny videos, then he would do conspiracy scary stuff, and then now he's doing sort of almost docu-series, so that was from one of his maybe not the earliest Shane, but sort of after that.
Yeah, after he started doing his whole every once in a while kind of video, and that's when I started getting into that.
There's a lot to unpack, and I think first of all, we did an episode some time ago about, I think it might have been one of our earlier episodes about cancel culture, and I think that's sort of the conversation that's taking place regarding, specifically Shane Dawson and Jenna Marbles. In that episode, we talked about how, people will, on social media, there'll be some backlash against, a personality or an influencer because they posted something, objectionable, offensive, racist, whatever. And so people will talk about it. They'll say, hey, remember, it could be a recent event, something that's done recently, or even they'll look back at old content for people and they'll say, hey, this is problematic. People will feel like there's no accountability for something that happened that they feel like somebody should at least apologize for or be held responsible for. And so that's sort of what's taking place with both of these YouTubers. And that's different than, there are more recent controversies with other people. And we don't have to get into it, but, with everything that's happened with Black Lives Matter, with the George Floyd protests, there's been a resurgent emphasis to not just hold people accountable, but look back at old things and say, hey, this is why it's problematic. So it's conversations about that, but it's also, canceling somebody. If somebody is very problematic, they'll say, hey, we're not going to follow this person anymore, and we're going to speak our mind about how we feel about this particular person and their views. So what's interesting about both of these cases is that, in a way they're similar, but they're also two very different people. So, I mean, I guess we can just jump right into it. So, with Shane is somebody that has been controversial throughout his career. And this is regarding multiple videos where, he either was wearing blackface or imitating a person of color on multiple occasions. He's also made comments regarding I think it was like maybe Willow Smith or somebody that was a minor, and he was making comments about them. But Shane is somebody that, and he admits, he's courted controversy. He's tried to. He says he modeled himself after like Howard Stern. So he's, pushing. He's always tried to push the envelope, but in more recent years, he's sort of toned that down a little bit. But now this backlash has been with all those content and comments from years past. Jenna Marbles, on the other hand, is there were videos that she had done. I believe it was 2016. It was like a handful of videos where I think she also was in blackface, if I'm not mistaken. And then there was another video about she imitated like rapping about an Asian person, and she used some offensive language. She also apologized for like slut shaming somebody, talking to women, and she even said that nobody called her out on that video, but that was something she felt bad about. What's interesting is that these are like old school YouTubers. Jenna Marbles, her channel started in 2010, so she's literally been on YouTube for over 10 years.
Right.
Shane might be older than that in terms of how long he's had his channel. But he's had like the Shane and Friends podcast, Shane Glosson, he has multiple channels and multiple outlets. So what's interesting is that they're two very different people, in the sense that I think Jenna Marbles posts more like fun, lighthearted material. But I was less familiar with the controversies surrounding her than I was with Shane. People have tried to cancel Shane for a long time, and I think now, given the context of discussions regarding race and culture and like things like white privilege and all of those conversations and the protests that's happening, I think it just came to a head where all of those factors played a part in both of their cases. So yeah, I mean, the other thing too I wanted to say was like, in no way are we, or myself, we're not defending them. They even said themselves they're apologizing, in multiple videos and multiple platforms. They've apologized. They said that what they did was wrong. They wouldn't do it again. They regret doing it. So, it'd be a poor decision to kind of defend that when they themselves admit that it's not a good thing. So there's that. But I will say that, like, I like Shane's videos. I like his conspiracies, scary stories. Like, I'm into that stuff. So that's how I first came across Shane Dawson. I know he doesn't do as much of that anymore. That's how I sort of got involved and interested in YouTube, was just like watching his videos. Jenna Marbles, what's interesting is that I was less familiar with her channel on her own than I was with Jenna and Julian's podcast. Yeah, like a few years ago, I was really interested in like conspiracy, scary stories, and that's when I came across Jenna and Julian's podcast, together. I sort of knew them as like a team, and I hadn't really watched her individual videos and channel until like maybe about last year. What she does, it's unique, it's creative. Same thing with Julian. The style of their podcast was, part of our channel here comes out of, looking at what they do and looking at what other similar influencers do. When you're doing things like podcasts and videos, we don't have like super fancy advanced equipment. We don't have a studio. We're on speakerphone right now. I have a Yeti mic connected to my laptop, but that's pretty much it. But I do look to other people to see like, what are they doing? If I think it's cool or it's fun or it's interesting, you get ideas from other people. And I think their podcast was a big inspiration for myself, and I think for both of us. But we're at a situation where people are trying to cancel Shane, and then Jenna decided to self-cancel. Like, she decided to step down from her channel on her own terms. So, and I think that's very different than somebody getting canceled and saying we're not gonna watch somebody anymore.
Right.
She made that decision for her own mental health and well-being, and she said she wasn't having fun with it anymore. So she decided to take a break. We don't know if it's permanent. We don't know how long it's going to be. But, if you've followed the Jenna Julian podcast, I think there's been two. This is like the second week where it's just been Julian.
Yeah, I saw the one that he posted, I think, recently. I saw the first one. I saw part of the first one where it was him by himself, and he was, like, obviously upset, like, that he was doing it by himself.
Yeah. The past year, they've been into, like, streaming on Twitch and doing, like, video games and stuff like that. So I don't know the status of that, because that's definitely a different platform. Like, that's not YouTube, it's Twitch. It's a different format. So I don't know if she's still on there gaming or if it's just Julian. So that's another thing to watch, is like, is she active on other channels?
Mm-hmm. I don't think so, though. I think in the first one he was talking about, like, how, like, him and Jenna and I think, like, another person would play video games on Twitch, and, like, she's not doing that either. So, like, I mean, I could be wrong, but I think that's, like, a negative. I don't think that she's doing that at all. So I think she's just completely, like, just not on the internet at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, the other thing, too, that I thought about this was, I know that in the wake of, like, the George Floyd protests, the Black Lives Matter, influencers and prominent people on, like, YouTube, social media, Instagram, they made a decision to, like, self silence for a few days or a week or something, and they said, we're gonna give an open platform and a microphone to people of color, different influencers, different groups, charity organizations, and I think that she made this decision around that time. So I think that might be playing a part in her case as well. But, like, if we, looking back at our first episode about cancel culture and canceling somebody that's problematic, it looked very different than it does today, because in the wake of protests and conversations about race and, systematic oppression, white supremacy, all that stuff, there's been a really weird, interesting political backlash to that, which I don't think was apparent when we did our first episode on this. So in recent, like, the past month, there's been a lot of, like right-wing conservative, Trumpian politics that have come out against cancel culture. I think even, like, Trump, like, in one of his press conferences or speeches, it might have been the one on the 4th of July at Mount Rushmore, he was talking, like, very negatively about cancel culture, sort of framing it as, like, a political issue, where he said something like, oh, good people, or, well-meaning people, they're getting canceled for no reason just because people disagree with them or something. That realm of politics seems to be, like, reacting against movements to hold people accountable, or to bring to light, objectionable views, or, like, offensive views or posts or whatever. It's a weird place to be, because on the one hand you have people that, I'm a fan of, that I like, that are people are attempting to cancel or they've self-canceled because of old posts that they've had. But at the same time, there are people that are really objectionable, that have racist, really offensive, negative things that I think should be canceled and have a right to be canceled.
Right.
And then you have, you know, Trump and right wing conservative people like against all of it.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
if I had to summarize, somebody like Jenna Marbles that has grown and changed and is sincere and contrite in their apologies, I think they should be afforded that opportunity to apologize and become better. But that's different than somebody that's like not apologetic, that doesn't apologize, that doesn't see that what they're doing is wrong, and is just adamant that oh, you're offended, so you're the problem.
Hmm.
There has to be a medium point there. But I have no problem with people that say that really don't like Shane Dawson or Jeffree Star or that whole crew, and I don't blame them for that. I don't blame them for being offended by Shane. I don't blame them for not liking him. If he's sincere in his apology and he's not doing it for clout, and if he's not, if he's trying to move forward and be a better person, then I'm supportive of that. I don't blame people that, you know, will come forward and say, I'm done with him. Like that's their right. The other person I wanted to mention though was Jeffree Star. So he's sort of like, his name has come up a lot over the recent years, but again recently, just with regarding this conversation about cancel culture. So I wanted to get your thoughts about it because over the past few months, there are some things that he did that I thought were done in poor taste. But he ties in with Shane because there's sort of been a back and forth with them, with Jeffree, with Shane, with other influencers, with James Charles. Like there's a lot of drama that's happening, like a back and forth between all of them. So I just wanted to get your take on, like, were you following with what was happening?
You're talking about Jeffree Star, Shane Dawson, and I think her name is Tati Westbrook. Is that who you're
Yeah,
talking about?
yeah, her video about she came out against Shane and Jeffree and said that they pressured her to do a video that was denigrating James Charles or something, like that whole drama.
Yeah. So this goes back to a previous video that Tati Westbrook put out against James Charles. So there was initially the first video about James Charles and how she was totally against James Charles. She basically called him like a predator, things that James Charles was apparently doing, but it was like pretty much like saying that like
He was like DMing people that basically like trying to hit on them, right? Like there were multiple people.
yeah, and like it was like multiple people. I think some of them were like straight guys to like go out with him or whatever. Like there's this whole thing, and also like betraying their friendship over like he was advertising like a different company.
It was like
Like
a rival
yeah,
makeup group or a company, right?
it was a rival like vitamin company
Oh
because I
yeah.
guess like Tati Westbrook has her own like set of like beauty vitamins. Like I didn't know that was a thing that beauty vitamins exist, but like they do. And I guess he was like advertising like one when he like his best friend is like CEO of their own beauty vitamin company, so it was kind of like all kinds of issues going on with James Charles. And then now this one that happened a month ago, maybe like a few weeks ago, it's now basically the opposite of that, and it's like, no, I was wrong, James Charles doesn't do any of this, but what who really are the bad guys are Shane Dawson and Jeffree Star, because they coerced me to, you know, believe and say bad things about, James. They led me to believe that James Charles is like this. And then she goes and apologizes for, whatever she said to James Charles. So it's a mess.
Right. And then the timing of that, though, was surrounding all of this. A lot of people were getting called out and canceled, not just YouTubers or influencers.
This timing could have not been worse. The statements came out about Willow Smith and like all kinds of things. So like it's like, okay, the statements about Willow Smith, those came out, and then the following week there was this about like Shane Dawson and Jeffree Star. She was saying that she was like gaslit into saying like all these horrible things about James Charles. So like this could not have come at like the worst time. And then also like Shane's like history of like blackface and like other kinds of like controversial stuff like on his old videos have like resurfaced. So yeah, this isn't a good time for Shane Dawson.
Yeah, and then I think when all of this was happening, YouTube decided to demonetize his channel for
that's right,
an indefinite period of time. That's not unprecedented for YouTube to do. They did the same thing with I think it was like Jake Paul or what's his brother, Logan Paul, with the whole like Suicide Forest thing, like the controversies with that. People were so outraged, and then YouTube decided to demonetize their channel. And the reason that that's a big deal is, if you're not familiar with how that works, is on YouTube, if you have I believe if you have over 1,000 subscribers and like 1,000 hours of watch time, you're allowed to monetize your channel. So YouTube will play ads during your videos, and you get ad revenue from that. Why that's such a big deal is somebody like Shane Dawson or Jeffree Star or Jake Paul, they get so many views, like, and I'm talking like 1 million views per video, routinely. I think if you go to Shane's channel, there's not a single video on his channel that's under 1 million views.
Right.
So what ends up being like, 5-10 cents or whatever, however the pay structure works, per ad click times, however million views, it's a lot of money that they get from this ad revenue. They've built up, whether it's Shane, Jenna, Jeffree, Jake Paul, Logan Paul, they've built up their channels in a certain way where, they have fans. Maybe they'll market products. On a lot of videos, they'll say, this video is sponsored by such and such. And then for 30 seconds, they'll talk about a product within the video itself. So there's a lot at play in terms of the economics of it. And they've built up, great lives for themselves where, they've done videos about house tours, and, Shane and Jeffree have talked about how they grew up, very poor, and you look at their homes now and it's just like, massive amounts of, wealth and influence that they've built from their channels over the years.
Right.
For Jeffree's case, it's not all YouTube ad revenue. He has, the makeup line and cosmetics, and that's part of where he gets, his money from. Like, that's a large portion of his business and his revenue.
Yes.
That's not a minor slap on the wrist. Like, that's a big deal for Shane, and we'll see how long it lasts. I don't know if that's still going on, but that was a response by YouTube to people that were offended by the video. Like, it's not just, people are offended and that's it. It's like there were consequences to this. They, everybody we're talking about came out with some sort of apology or response. Whether you believe them, that's up to the individual. Shane, Jeffree, the Paul brothers, Jenna Marbles, like they all have strong followings where, you know, are these controversies enough where it's going to make a big impact on the people that already like them? I'm not sure that that's the case. I think people that didn't like Shane or don't like Jeffree, they felt that way for a while, and this really didn't change that.
Yeah. If you've never liked Jeffree Star, you're never going to like Jeffree Star. Like, there's never going to be, like, something that he's going to do where you're, like, automatically you're just going to be like, you know what, I like Jeffree Star now. Like, that, I think, if you never have, you never will. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
I think it's kind of like the president. Trump has his supporters, and maybe like the more he does, offensive, crazy things, his support starts to like get chipped away. But there's still like a baseline level of people that are gonna like him no matter what. And I feel like that's the case for a lot of people in entertainment, media, whatever it is. There's always going to be a core group of fans that, where you can do no wrong.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that people should not be held accountable. Like, that's the other thing too, is that, in terms of all of this, like the controversies, no matter who we're talking about, everybody that we've mentioned so far has apologized or addressed it on some level, whatever controversy it is. But there are people out there that are purposely like controversial, like they like to push the envelope and they don't apologize. But what they do, how they do respond is they'll say, "Oh, I don't know why I'm being attacked because people disagree with me." That really baffles me, and it does bother me when people act like that, because they're basically like whining or crying because people are calling them out, or like, they're upset at their views. They're upset that people are offended at what they said. And this is mostly in like the political realm, but it can also be like, media, just broadly. There are people that complain because other people don't like their ideas. And it's like, no, like if you have ideas that are objectionable, offensive, racist, problematic, why are you surprised when people are angry at that or are against you because of that?
Right.
That's how our system of democracy and free speech works, is that, yeah, you have the right to say and discuss what you want, but people have the right to cancel you. People have the right to react negatively to that. So that's why I'm all like in favor of people that are upset or angry or trying to cancel any of the people that we mentioned, even Jenna Marbles. I don't have a problem with people saying, I'm going to stop watching them. In the case of Jenna Marbles, I think people can have their own opinion about whether it was fair to her, the reaction that she got. Again, she said she did wrong, so I'm going to take her word for it. I will say, though, that watching their podcast now with just Julian, it's not the same for me. And I think it has taken away from their dynamic in terms of the content that they're producing. Like, I love Julian. I love his channel and his videos. They're so creative. He does a lot of like cooking recently. He'll make interesting dishes. They'll do art projects and all that. Like, I think he does great work, but for him to do a podcast on his own, it's just sort of it's not the same.
Yeah, it feels different. It's kind of like, it's got like a sad vibe to it now.
Yeah. But my hope is that eventually she'll be back in some form or another, whether it's on their podcast or doing a different project. And again, all of these people, Shane and Jenna especially, they've been on YouTube and out there with their work for over 10 years. Like, that's a crazy amount of time. Like, they're YouTube veterans.
Right.
And they started because they were looking for alternatives to mainstream media, like a different way of approaching like Hollywood and the movies and film, you know. It's interesting to see how far they've come, but you know, sometimes you have to move on and do different things, and um, you know, that may be also what's sort of going on with her and maybe Shane. We'll see what happens, but we're in a place, you know, it's been a tough year for a lot of people, but I think there's a lot of good that's happening in terms of conversations that have needed to be had about things like race, you know, systemic racism, politics, culture, um, you know, white supremacy, misogyny, all those things that it's good that we're having those conversations now and everybody's learning and growing from it. And, you know, it can be awkward, it can be painful for a lot of people, but, you know, hopefully it's happening for the best and people are learning from it.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly.
There was one thing I did want to also ask you about in terms of Jeffree. So I guess he's still rolling out like his products and makeup lines and all that. And people are sort of like, again, you know, he has his fans that are going to support him no matter what. But other people have said like the timing may not be right. I thought it was problematic when the coronavirus was first hitting and
Hmm.
he rolled out his line. I think it was like a cremated or something, and it was like a
Oh, the cremated palette? Yeah.
I, you know, and this is just my opinion. I thought it was in poor taste. I wasn't super outrageously offended by it, but I thought, is this the right time to do this? Um, and I thought if I was him, I might have pushed it.
Hmm.
I understand that his business, you know, it's a multi-million dollar industry for him. He has a lot of employees. He has a factory in LA. He does a lot of work for other brands.
Hmm.
But I thought that particular line at that moment was in poor taste. I think he even came out with an apology video for it. But even today, he posted something like he's coming out with a new line. He's excited about it. And there was sort of like a muted reaction to it. So I wanted to get your response because I know you're into makeup and fashion and all that. Like, do you think that it's just purely a business decision for him? Like, do you think he takes into account like the optics of something like the coronavirus, um, like the protests, when he's making these decisions?
You know, it's hard to say because like I understand that like things like this, like cosmetics, like um I don't know about fashion necessarily, but like I know that like cosmetics or like skincare or whatever, like those take time to like develop, and like the process of it is kind of like a long time. And I know that like Jeff, like if you saw um the whole like docu-series about like how they made like the controversy palette, it takes like, you know, months to like a year at least for something like that to come out. The cremated palette took at least a full year, possibly, like to go from like idea to palette. All those people who worked on it, all those people who like threw ideas out, packaging, design, down to like the shades, like the colors, like mixing the colors, like the whole like science behind it, the formulas, you know, making the testers, all the accessories that go along with it, like all the merch design, all the people who package the stuff in the factory, or the warehouse, like, you know, shipping, jobs and money, and like, and you know, that's a lot of hard work. Like, and if something happens where they have to like push it back or not release it, like, you know, I know I would be kind of like upset if I came up with like the design of the package, my design is not coming out, like nobody's going to see my design, like nobody's going to own this product that I worked hard on. Like, I would be upset. But also, like, I can see that, like, you know, consumers, like, we're out of jobs. Like, they didn't have a job to pay for this. Like, I think the pallet's like 50 something dollars. I didn't buy it. So I didn't purchase it, but I believe that like usually his pallets are like over $50.
Yeah, just given the
A lot of people,
economics, yeah, it's hard for
yeah,
people right now.
like people were living off their like
Y-
the
The
stimulus check.
yeah,
You know what I mean? So
stimulus, yeah.
to spend like that $50 could have gone to like groceries or you know uh, sometimes like your electricity bill or to pay the internet or your phone or something like essential instead of like a makeup palette. You know what I mean? So like I can understand like both sides of it.
These projects are thought out, way ahead of time. So, it's not like, oh, Jeffree wanted to do this like in February and in March it's coming out, and that's when the virus hit. It's more
Right.
like a year ago he conceived of this idea, set the wheels in motion, and as he's sort of, looking at a launch date,
Hmm.
bam, we get hit with this out of nowhere,
Yeah.
and it just so happened that the timing was poor. And he even came out with a video addressing it. So it was not like he just out of nowhere. Enough people were upset about this where he had to come out with a video,
Right. But
defending
also,
himself and the business or whatever.
yeah, also that you brought it up, like where it was out of nowhere, like for like a March launch. Like, I mean, who's to say that you couldn't have released it in February, like right before everybody lost their jobs or like weren't able to earn a paycheck or whatever? Like, I mean, who says that he didn't have that ability to be like, you know what, I'm gonna release this early. Like, I don't know what's gonna happen within the next like month or so. Like, it sounds like everything's getting worse. It could have been possible too, where he could have like released it early, or maybe waited until like at least now, maybe July. Like, I mean, I know that like not everybody is back to work and not everybody has a job, but like, you know, but also like, is there a right time to like release anything at all? Like, I mean,
Yeah,
we've been at home for months already. Like,
yeah, that's a good point. I think if you're talking about cosmetics, luxury brands, there is something a little bit morbid about advertising, um, luxury goods, expensive things, when not only do you have, the economics, you have the health crisis, you have, riots and protests regarding racial injustices. There's so many political, social factors right now where, you know, you could argue any, advertising or release of, luxury goods seems like it's in poor taste. Um, my thought was just that at the time, it wasn't just like Jeffree's product, but the nature of the product where it's called cremated. It's,
mm,
there's a lot of like death imagery. Um,
right.
I thought it was in poor taste then, but I'm thinking also like looking at the issues about, what you're discussing. Um, like say he had delayed that, pushed it back and say, let's wait for a better time. The virus, as it's getting worse, it just, you may never come across a time to release it.
Yeah.
And
Like, exactly.
but I think that's a business decision where, businesses all the time will just say, let's tank a product. It's never going to be a good time. Let's just put it in the vault and wait and see. I don't know if makeup deteriorates with time. I don't know the chemistry behind it where, is a product going to be the same a year from now?
Once you open it after like a year, it's probably not that good. Maybe 2 years, because then like the formula, like, I mean, depending on like what it is, like it'll probably start to like dry out or like not blend well. So like, um, yeah, I want to say maybe like a year or two. If it's packaged correctly, if it's like sealed, like I don't think that it would just like not be useful.
some companies say let's take the loss to avoid bad publicity. Um, but again, that doesn't sound like Jeffree's brand or his, the way he operates. He's very, business savvy, business minded, but he doesn't mind controversy. He doesn't mind the negative backlash. And so
Yeah.
I think if
I mean, because
yeah,
it's kind of like whatchamacallit. Like, they're always going to be talking about him, whether it's good or bad. And, regardless, like, it's going to be good for him because, like, that's publicity. That's, like, you know, if he's still in, like, people's minds, people are still going to buy his stuff no matter what.
yeah, it's sort of like the Kardashian model where, as long as people are talking about you, it's all good. Like the old saying that there's no such thing as bad publicity. Influencers, maybe younger people, subscribe to that theory and notion where as long as people are talking about you, you're still in the game, so to speak. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but the problem with that is it leads to toxic content. It leads to negative content. Um, you know, how often do people talk about the Kardashians in a negative way? You know, it's sort of like, would you rather be, successful but hated, or, well loved and you can sleep at night? People will do things for attention, but on the flip side, the downside to that is people will take you less seriously. There's less weight to your name, so to speak. For the rest of this year and 2021 is what new voices, what new influencers, even like what new mediums are going to be available. Like TikTok has been so popular recently. There's so many different changing ways of consuming media, and I think, to me, this is also, like, if we're gonna sort of wrap up our episode, it's sort of closing the book, I think, on that era of YouTube. It's not to say that YouTube is over or it's not going to be around. I think, on the contrary, like, coronavirus has forced people to consume more media in their homes. YouTube and Netflix and all that stuff is growing versus, like, the movie theaters and the world outside. Hollywood has been shut down almost. They're not working on any projects, they're not releasing any movies. So I think YouTube will be around for a while, but
Yeah.
I think that era of, like, the Jenna Marbles, the Shane Dawsons, we're moving on from that, and Shane's been doing less videos um, over the past few years. Like you were saying earlier, there was a time when he was releasing a video every day,
Mm-hmm.
and now it's sort of like 2 months will go by, 3 months will go by, and Shane all of a sudden has a video. I think that's sort of the story, is like, where are we going next? And I'm excited to see where that goes.
Right.
And we also have to remember, like, they're getting older. Like, these YouTubers and influencers that have been around for 10 years, like, they're in their 30s. Shane got married or is getting married. All these people have been around, and it's sort of like, when you're doing the same thing, it kind of gets old.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's also, like, maybe on a final note, is that you have to be creative. You have to try new things, and maybe that's sort of what Jenna Marbles has in mind, is let's try something different. Let's move to a different platform, a different app. Maybe that's Twitch, maybe that's TikTok for her. So, I don't blame her for wanting to step aside on her own terms and say, this isn't fun. She's apologizing for the backlash. It's not the same for her, so she wants to do a step away from her Jenna Marbles channel, and maybe next year she'll do something different. So I think that about wraps up like what I wanted to say. Did you have any final notes as we sort of close out this episode on cancel culture part two, the controversies surrounding Jenna Marbles getting deplatformed, Shane Dawson getting called out, Jeffree Star, people have tried to cancel him for years. Just any final notes regarding maybe like the people we talked about, or where social media is heading in 20 end of 2020, 2021 going forward.
Well, I mean, I hope that like there are some new ideas that come, on YouTube. Like, I mean, I use YouTube like every day. Like, I watch a lot of like, I'm not really like into like makeup tutorials anymore. Like that was kind of like a thing maybe for the past couple of years, maybe 2 years ago. Like it's makeup tutorials, and now it's like testing. Like, oh, like does this really say like what it does, or like let's try out a full face using only this specific brand. Um, that gets kind of like old for me. I really enjoy like Rosanna Pansino's like baking videos. Like I know that she's been like doing different kinds of stuff for like, the pandemic. So it's like her and her boyfriend are like eating drive-through meals, like, a 24 hours of like drive-through meals. And I've been watching a lot of like Justine like test out like her, gadgets at her house. And then I also watch Graveyard Girl. I don't know if you've ever seen any videos by her, but like she always the videos that I like by her, as seen on TV, products, or like some like beauty products that she thought were weird and like wanted to try out. So videos kind of interest me. I hope that there are some like new kinds of like content. Like I really like the docu-series like idea, where they take like a subject and then they like, um, continue with it like for a few episodes. I just hope that there's like something new to like keep our interest. YouTube has actually been pretty like been keeping me entertained like this whole like pandemic, and like we don't know how long this is gonna last, and who knows what the future holds. So like I hope there's like some new content. I know that there's always like every day there's like a new like YouTuber out there like making a video, and I just hope that like there's some like new like refreshing like stuff. And maybe like if you've been on too long, like I think like I don't know, I just feel like maybe like sometimes like that happens. Like it's not like a lot of like these new YouTubers, like maybe for the exception of like Jake Paul, but I also don't know how long he's been on YouTube. He's always getting canceled, but then he always does like things that are not great. But I don't know, maybe like if you're just on for too long, maybe that's just what happens to you too. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
because it's
No.
like now it's like, okay, well, who's next? Like, who's gonna get canceled? Who's gonna get thrown off of YouTube next? You know what I mean?
No,
Um,
that's a really good point that I really hadn't thought of until you brought that up. Is that they've been on for 10 years or more, um, and we're all a product of the culture and environment where we grow up in. At that time when they're doing those videos, which now we view as um, more clearly like offensive and not okay. And people will say it was never okay to do that, but yet they are products of their environment and their time, and as they've been on, like you're saying, for over 10 years, they're going to have that volume of content stretching back that long. And
mhm.
so there are going to be, especially with somebody like Shane, who's, intentionally trying to push the envelope and, be like Howard Stern and be like offensive and gross and whatever. the volume of content is going to be there for him where somebody's going to be offended by it. And and I think that's a really good point about how, the people that are not getting canceled are the people that are relatively new to it, and
Hmm.
they're creating their content in the wake of the recent events, where the culture and the dialogue has shifted, I think for the better, to be more inclusive, to be more respectful, to be, not racist.
Right.
As the culture is getting pushed in that direction, which is for the better, these strides are being made more clearly and more emphatically now. So you look back at 10 years ago, and that's going to look very different than content made in 2020. Just like content in 2007 is going to look very different than content in 1950, films in 1950, 60, 70, if you watch old movies or films, there's going to be dialogue, and people will say things that I'm like, did they really just say that? Like, and
Oh yeah.
people are okay with that. Like, I was watching a movie 2 nights ago that was made in 1987, and like parents were like in the movie, routinely like hitting their kids or like yelling at them, um, and I'm like, this is like not
What movie were
okay.
you watching, first of all?
Um, so it was a movie that it came up in a meme, and so I was curious and I tracked it down.
Oh.
It's about this guy that gets he works at Target. He gets a job at Target because he gets fired from a gas station, and he gets locked into the store with like his crush from high school, but he's like in his like 2021, and he's like works at Target, gets locked in with this girl, and then they foil like a robbery attempt. But early on in the movie, like the mom and dad are like, it's mostly the dad. He's like screaming at this kid, and it's like threatening to beat him and all this stuff. And I'm like, this is so different than a movie, any modern movie that I've seen in the past, 5, 10 years. Like, just, it wasn't even just the aesthetics or the style, it was like the dialogue.
Hmm.
And I was like, this is so different. And so, I think that's a really good point that you brought up, just like the age and when something is made and how long somebody's been on. You know, Robert De Niro in a movie in 2019 is not the same. Robert De Niro, Al Pacino, when they're in a movie that's like more recent, it's very different than their older work. And so the dialogue may be offensive or racist or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, but you see how things progress in terms of the culture, and given time, people will change how they approach roles and projects, creativity, and all that.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I think that's a great note to end on. There's hope that this is going to lead in the right direction. It's going to inspire younger people to produce content that's more reflective of the values that we want to hold in 2020, to be more inclusive, to encourage dialogue, to have a platform open for people that are not just. I think it bears repeating or mentioning that, all of the people that we talked about they're not people of color, they're, white people.
Yes.
Shane,
Yeah.
Jenna, Jeffree, people that we've talked about that have been problematic, that are, getting canceled or attempting to get canceled. They're coming from a place of privilege. Even somebody like Jeffree, that his actions were the most egregious of the people that we've talked about, just given his like overtly going on racist dialogues. And my hope is that it's going to open up a platform for people of color, people of different backgrounds to, if it's not YouTube, to use other social media platforms, have their voice heard. Because I think a lot of the conversations regarding, the riots and, racial discrimination, it's people have not had a voice and they've not felt heard. Something as simple as like media, films, movies, television, social media, YouTube, whatever. And I think that means supporting people of color, supporting new content creators, supporting young people that are trying to put themselves out there. But yeah, I think that about wraps it up. This was a topic that we were discussing over a year ago. I think, was it last year?
I was gonna say probably last year sometime.
Yeah, we did an episode about cancel culture, but I thought this episode was needed because since like all of this was unfolding, but it's still something that's happening and being talked about today. It'll be interesting to see what happens next for each of their cases because they're so different.
Right.
All right. So this was about as fun as it could be, given just like I thought it was kind of a heavy topic, which is ironic because you're talking about YouTubers.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for talking today, for having this conversation. We hope you guys enjoyed this. Part 2 of our cancel culture episodes. And would love to get your guys' thoughts on what's happening with Jenna Marbles, Shane Dawson, Jeffree Star, other YouTubers, and see where you fall. Like, are you fans of these individual people? Do you not even know who they are? Have you been following them for a while? Would love to get your guys' reactions to that. So thank you so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed this podcast. Please like and subscribe, or wherever you're listening to this. And we'll see you next time. But thanks, Drea, for calling in today.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yep. Stay safe. Wear a mask. And thanks for listening. Bye.
Bye, guys.